Silence can be louder than screaming, especially when it's engineered. What viewers saw after Kody Brown walked away looked calm, controlled, almost civil. But that calm wasn't healing. It was containment. Because behind the scenes, according to those close to the family, a system cracked, and was immediately sealed shut. On the surface, the show framed it as a breakup, a wife leaving, a husband struggling, a family adjusting. That's the version you were meant to accept. But beneath that storyline was something far more dangerous, an attempt to reactivate an old power structure, and a private shutdown that stripped it of authority overnight. Here's the pattern most people missed. Once Kody disengaged, the confrontations stopped, not because peace was reached, but because leverage was lost. One person exited the system. Another lost control of it. And when control disappears, the damage doesn't end. It shifts into finances, legacy, parenting dynamics, and psychological fallout that never makes it to air. This isn't about drama. It's about who benefited from silence, and who paid the cost. Stay with this investigation, because we're about to lay out the evidence that explains why the rules vanished, why the tone changed, and why this family will never operate the same way again. There are moments in long-running reality television when everything changes. Not because of what was shown, but because of what never made it to air. This is one of those moments. For years, audiences watched the Brown family navigate plural marriage in public, conflict, compromise, and collapse unfolding one season at a time. Viewers believed they had seen it all. The arguments, the tears, the breakups. But according to sources close to the family, one private conversation, never filmed, never aired, may explain one of the most noticeable shifts in tone the series has ever shown. A moment when a line was crossed, and immediately shut down. If this conversation never happened on camera, why did everything change afterward? To understand why this moment matters, we need to revisit the structure that once held the Brown family together. Sister Wives premiered in 2010 as a rare, inside look at a modern plural family. At the center was Kody Brown, his 4 wives, and their shared belief system, one rooted in fundamentalist Mormon ideology, though separate from the mainstream LDS Church. For years, the show emphasized cooperation over conflict. Disagreements were framed as growing pains. Authority was implied rather than challenged. And within that structure, one idea remained constant. Kody set the rules. But what happens when the rules no longer apply? Kody's role in the family. Kody Brown was not just another wife in the family system. She was the emotional center. From early seasons, Kody was positioned as the caretaker, the wife who managed children, traditions, and morale. She often absorbed emotional labor while deferring authority. Yet viewers also saw something else: dissatisfaction. By season 13 and onward, Kody openly discussed loneliness, unmet needs, and feeling dismissed. These weren't impulsive comments. They were consistent, repeated, and increasingly specific. By the time she announced her departure in season 16, it was clear this was not a sudden decision, it was the result of years of erosion. But leaving the marriage didn't mean leaving the power dynamics behind. The breakup and its aftermath. Kody's decision to leave the marriage marked a turning point, not just emotionally, but structurally. For the first time in the series, a wife did not negotiate. She exited. In interviews, Kody stated clearly that the relationship no longer worked for her. She cited lack of intimacy, unequal treatment, and emotional neglect. Kody, in contrast, framed the breakup differently. In multiple confessionals, he referenced loyalty, obedience, and what he described as rules that once governed the family. And this is where sources say the unseen conversation begins. Because according to those close to the situation, Kody didn't stop referencing those rules privately. The alleged private conversation. Multiple individuals familiar with off-camera interactions describe a moment that occurred after Christine's departure but before several later filmed scenes. According to these accounts, Kody attempted to revisit what he called the old rules, expectations around authority, respect, and decision-making that once defined plural marriage in the household. Christine's response, sources say, was immediate. The conversation was shut down. Not argued. Not negotiated. Ended. Those close to Christine describe her tone as calm, firm, and final. The message, as paraphrased by insiders, was clear: those rules no longer applied to her life. Mini hook. And shortly after, viewers noticed something different. The on-camera tone shift. In episodes that followed, audiences observed a marked change in Kody's demeanor around Christine. He was quieter, less confrontational, more restrained. Not reflective, restrained. This shift puzzled viewers. Online discussions questioned why Kody, previously outspoken and defensive, suddenly appeared cautious. Reddit threads analyzed his body language. Facebook groups compared earlier seasons to later ones frame by frame. The prevailing question was simple. What happened off-camera? Because silence, in reality television, is rarely accidental. Historical patterns of control. To contextualize this moment, it's important to examine how authority functioned historically in the Brown family. Across multiple seasons, Kody frequently referenced hierarchy: who was being loyal, who was cooperating, who was against the family. These dynamics align with broader sociological analyses of patriarchal religious structures, where authority is often maintained through expectation rather than enforcement. When a participant exits that system, the authority loses leverage. Christine's departure was not just emotional, it was structural. And once authority loses leverage, the conversation changes. Legal and social context. It's also critical to understand the legal reality behind plural marriage. Polygamy is not legally recognized in the United States. While the Browns lived openly, their marriages, except for one legal union at a time, were spiritual, not enforceable. That legal reality matters. Once Christine left, there were no legal obligations tying her to Kody beyond shared children, and those relationships are governed by family law, not religious hierarchy. Sources suggest Christine was acutely aware of this distinction, which may explain why that private boundary held. Fan and community reaction. Fan reaction to Christine's transformation has been notable. Across platforms, viewers describe her post-departure demeanor as lighter, more confident, and emotionally grounded. YouTube comments frequently reference her calm responses during tense scenes. Reddit users highlight her refusal to engage in circular arguments. Many interpret this as a shift from reaction to agency. Meanwhile, Kody's frustration appears increasingly internalized, expressed in confessionals rather than direct confrontation. A dynamic reversal that longtime viewers never expected. Long-term implications. If the alleged conversation occurred as described, its implications extend beyond one relationship. It signals a collapse of the ideological framework that once governed the family. Not through rebellion, through disengagement. When Christine declined to revisit old rules, she wasn't negotiating power, she was opting out of the system entirely. And systems cannot enforce authority over participants who no longer recognize them. Which raises a final question. Reality television often promises transparency, but its most consequential moments frequently happen off-camera. If this line was crossed, and firmly rejected, it may explain more than a tone shift. It may explain why certain arguments never resurfaced. Why certain topics vanished from conversation. Because once a boundary is enforced privately, it doesn't need to be defended publicly. When Kody referenced old rules, he was not talking about a single argument or a forgotten agreement. He was referencing an entire framework. For years, the family operated under a set of unspoken expectations, rules that were rarely written down, but clearly enforced. Emotional loyalty was prioritized over individual comfort. Disagreement was tolerated only when it stayed private. And authority flowed in one direction. Christine had lived inside that framework for decades. What changed was not her understanding of the rules, but her willingness to participate in them. Sources close to the family suggest that when Kody attempted to reintroduce these expectations after the separation, Christine did not debate their fairness. She questioned their relevance. And that distinction matters. Because systems of control depend on mutual belief. Once one party stops recognizing the system loses its leverage. This was not rebellion. It was disengagement. After the alleged private shutdown, viewers noticed something subtle but consistent. Kody did not escalate. His posture on camera changed. His speech slowed. His confrontations became indirect, often redirected toward confessionals rather than face-to-face exchanges. Christine, meanwhile, displayed what psychologists describe as post-detachment behavior. Her answers were shorter. Her tone was neutral. Emotional cues were minimal. This is not the body language of someone unsure. It is the body language of someone no longer negotiating. In interpersonal dynamics, silence is often mistaken for retreat. In reality, silence frequently signals resolution. When someone stops explaining themselves, it usually means the decision has already been made. Reality television does not show everything equally. Producers are trained to avoid moments that introduce legal ambiguity, contractual risk, or irreversible narrative shifts. Conversations that establish firm personal boundaries, especially those involving custody, authority, or control, are often considered high-risk footage. Instead, those moments are smoothed over. Editors rely on reaction shots, jump cuts, and selective confessionals to maintain continuity. The result is a calm surface that hides a decisive rupture underneath. If Christine privately closed the door on old rules, that moment would not fit neatly into episodic storytelling. It would end the conversation instead of extending it. And unresolved tension is easier to monetize than resolved authority. Before leaving, Christine's on-screen presence was marked by emotional fluctuation, frustration, sadness, attempts at repair. After leaving, those signals largely disappeared. What replaced them was consistency. She no longer sought validation in conversations. She no longer revisited unresolved conflicts. She did not attempt to relitigate the past. From a behavioral standpoint, this indicates closure, not avoidance. Experts note that once an individual exits a long-term controlling dynamic, emotional neutrality often follows. The conflict is no longer internal. Christine's calm was not accidental. It was strategic, whether consciously or not. Online, viewers have developed several dominant theories to explain the tone shift. One theory suggests a legal boundary was established, possibly related to parenting arrangements, which reframed future interactions. Another proposes that Christine made it clear she would disengage entirely if certain narratives were revisited. A third theory focuses on contracts, that production boundaries were set behind the scenes, limiting what could be discussed on camera. What's notable is not which theory is correct, but how consistent the audience reaction has been. Viewers overwhelmingly agree on one point. Something definitive happened off camera. And whatever it was, it worked. If this boundary was firmly established, it reshapes the future of the show. Authority dynamics do not reset easily. Once a participant exits the system and remains unaffected by pressure, the system cannot reclaim its original balance. Future group scenes reflect this shift. Conversations avoid direct confrontation. Topics are reframed. Confessionals carry the weight that dialogue no longer does. Christine does not need closure scenes, because closure already happened. And Kody, for the first time, appears to be responding to limits rather than setting them. If you believe reality TV hides more than it shows, align with this investigation by liking this video. It signals that this story matters. Comment below with the moment you first notice the shift. Your insight becomes part of the record. Subscribe to stay inside this series as we continue exposing what happens off camera. And when this ends, watch the linked playlist to see how this pattern repeats across the Brown family's history. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.